Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means the Hillsdale Dialogue is upon us. Once a week, Dr. Larry Arnn, usually Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, joins me, and we have been embarked for many months now, and we will remain embarked on reading this book, The World Crisis, Volume 1. And it's been a revelation to me, and it gives us an opportunity to do a little poetry as well. I'm not much of a poet, Dr. Arnn. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. I do not know much about Mr. Blake. I don't know much about poetry. Do you study poetry?
I have some favorite poets. There's a kind of student at Hillsdale College that I admire very much, and I call them warrior poets. They like poems with cadence and sometimes with a body count. And there's a lot of very noble poetry like that. So,
well, here is Blake.
Churchill liked poetry a lot.
He uses Blake. The most important chapter is July 24th through 30th, because the world hangs in the balance in 1914. And Churchill's memoir of the week of crisis begins, "Prepare, prepare the iron helm of war. Bring forth the lots, cast in the spacious orb. The angel of fate turns them with mighty hands and casts them out upon the darkened earth. Prepare, prepare." Now, you said at the beginning of our study of the world crisis, we ought to pay attention to the quotations and to the head notes. Why this quotation? Why do you think he uses this?
Well, it's the spirit of it, time to get ready. It's a Marshall quote. In other words, he regrets all of this, and he thinks it's the worst disaster ever to strike the world. But what's he doing right now? While working hard to stop the war, he's getting ready to fight. And that's what that quote is about. That's why that's there.
Last week you told the story a little prematurely. I want to go back and retell it again at length. There is a cabinet meeting about the Irish crisis. And the Irish crisis consumed Great Britain for 9 months. And into this comes Lord Edward Grey. And I don't know what you think of him. I've always thought he was pretty smart, but maybe by half too much, because he wouldn't tell anyone what he was doing, and the world didn't know what he was going to do. And Churchill, well, you describe it. Churchill looks up. He's just in a fog, and Lord Grey starts to read something.
Yeah, well, Churchill did admire Grey very much, and he was an inscrutable guy, very clever, and and he wasn't like today. So many talk out of both sides of their mouth. When he talked, he only talked out of one side, but he didn't talk that much. Anyway, Churchill, they're in the cabinet and they're trying to figure out what to do with 2 districts in southern Northern Ireland, and they're deep into it. Fermanagh and Tyrone. And you can look them up on the map. They're still there today. He and Sir Edward Grey gets a note from Austria, a copy of a note from Austria to Serbia, and it's threatening. And in fact, as it accumulates, nobody's ever heard such a note, read such a note in diplomatic correspondence, and it means war. And so they turn from this Irish problem, which is a constant distraction for decades, to this problem. We're going to be at war here in a few days if we're not careful. And so that's how everybody's attention is arrested to this at the top of the British government, which means, of course, that Churchill, the man in charge of the Navy, his mind was not on that day until that note arrives. But it's serious.
And then he says, He writes this, but at no time in all these last 3 years were we more completely ready. Churchill, as you said last week, he had a job. He was in charge of the Navy. And that job is incredibly complex because they're going from coal to oil. They're going from 13-inch guns to 15-inch guns, and they're dealing with submarines. This is stuff they've never dealt with before. He's worked around the clock. He brought in Jackie Fisher. They've thrown out a bunch of people. They brought in a new bunch of people. They got the future Admiral of the Great Blue Sea out there in Jellicoe. All he has done for 3 years is work. Dr. Arnn, if such a note arrived today, a Chinese démarche to Taiwan, would we be able to say, would anyone in our cabinet be able to say, we've never been more ready than we are right now?
Well, no. I mean,
No.
I don't. First of all, there are bound to be, if we get into a really bad war, which we might now, because we're weak, if we get into a really bad war, there will be some wonderful surprises from the quality of the commanders and the troops and the sailors and the airmen and the Marines. But there will be disappointments too. And one thing is the Chinese have a bigger Navy than we do, and they're growing faster than we are. And the trend is wider gap between them and us. But we need a Navy and an Air Force. We need dominance of the air and the sea. And oddly enough, that's just exactly parallel to the British position at this time in 1914. Separated by the English Channel, nobody can strike them suddenly. And that and his steps that he took, the fleet was ready. What did it take to get them ready? It wasn't just that they had to get ready to meet a much larger German Navy on the open sea, which was a problem they hadn't had for 100 years. Not since Nelson, really, had they gone up against navies that were as large as the British. And the German was not as large as the British, but it was large and getting larger. And at any particular point of concentration, for example, in the North Sea that lies between Germany and Britain, they could on a given day have a superior force, destroy a bunch of the German British Navy if they could do that, especially by surprise. Then Britain would be open to an invasion by a much bigger German army. So he had to get ready to deal with that through a war that might go on for a while. But the other thing he had to get ready for was the instant thing. The fleet had to be somewhere when hostilities started where it would be safe and where it could then go where it wanted and get there and fight where it wanted. And if it was in the wrong place, and mostly in southern England, in the tight English Channel, where the room to maneuver, if the Germans got a superior force against some British ships in the Channel, harder for them to run away. So they had to get up to Scotland, and that's a long way. That's several hundred miles, and they, through a very stormy sea, and the port up there, Scapa Flow, it's called. That's a really big port. And, it's really just a bunch of moorings with islands all over the place. A lot of room to sail around in there. And so they had to get up there because they'd be hard to find. And because whoever was coming, you could see them coming. And so they got up there. And what Churchill did, and it just so happened, there was one accident that was good. The British Navy was on annual maneuvers, summertime, August. And a lot of people were called up, and a lot of ships were at sea. And these events start coming. That telegram that was read by Sir Edward Grey in the cabinet comes, and the first thing Churchill thinks of is, we're all together right now. Let's keep us together.
Don't let anyone go on leave. All leaves are canceled.
That's right. That's it. And so there was some good fortune in that, but that meant that not only was the Navy bigger and stronger than it had ever been, it was also ready for the opening. And those were, achievements. And they come from...
There were people in command of it as well who would be ready to act. When we come back from the break, I've got to bring up, Hillsdale's nonpartisan. This is a nonpartisan hour. When we talk about energy in the executive and the president's capability right now in 2023, we're not being partisan. We're just talking about what Asquith had to do, along with Churchill and Gray, in 1 week because a crisis came. And they were ready, and they were able to do it. And the war wasn't won in the first week, but it wasn't lost. And that's the key thing and the key difference that I think Americans have to think about as we go forward in this unusually turbulent summer. Don't go anywhere.
Hey, it's Scott Bertram. If you haven't yet, now would be a good time to check out the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. It's over at podcast.hillsdale.edu. What's there? Free nationwide access to all of Hillsdale's podcast content. That includes shows like the Hillsdale Dialogues, the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, the Larry P. Arnn Show, and now, new Imprimis. You can listen to any of those programs wherever you are and whenever you want, and it's always free. So find out more about all of our shows at podcast.hillsdale.edu. You can subscribe to any program you want. New episodes will come right to your device, or grab the Hillsdale College Podcast Network Superfeed, and you'll be the first to get access to all of the content posted on the site. If you want to come close to stepping inside a classroom here at Hillsdale College, well, the Hillsdale College Podcast Network is for you. Check it out at podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm about to say a bit of heresy. We are lucky that FDR was president in 1941 because he was maybe at the height of his powers. He knew the people around him. He'd put George Marshall into place. Marshall fired people left, right, and center, and they were ready as well, though they did not get into it. Do you agree with me about that, Larry, that we were lucky to have FDR in the presidency in 1941?
Yeah, I do. Professor Jaffa, my teacher, who was alive in those days, and in fact working in the Defense Department in the Second World War.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He was no friend of Franklin Roosevelt, but he thinks that the year 1940 was Franklin Roosevelt's finest hour. There's a book by a guy named Joseph Lash that claims that. And I think that's probably right. And also, Roosevelt had prepared. He had a guy named Harry Hopkins, who was, a crazy socialist kind of guy, but very capable man, very close to Roosevelt. He lived in the White House for much of the war years. And so he, and then later Averell Harriman, another one person close to Roosevelt, got sent to talk to Churchill. And after the crisis, Churchill comes to power in 1940 in the middle of the crisis of the German attack to the West. The Chamberlain government breaks. Churchill becomes prime minister on the 10th of May, 1940. And by the middle of June, France had fallen and Britain was alone. And then what's America going to do? And Churchill had corresponded with Roosevelt while he was First Lord of the Admiralty, again in the beginning of the First World War, as he was through the beginning of the Second. He was again First Lord of the Admiralty, and Roosevelt had worked for the U.S. Navy, and so they addressed each other as former naval person. Well, he sends these guys to size up Churchill and the situation in Britain, and he decides to help. And the help was, to British eyes, stingy, and we had to pay a lot for it. They gave us old destroyers first. Then they started, because the submarine warfare in 1940 almost destroyed Britain, and they took up the escort duties for more than half the way across the Atlantic, vast relief to the British Navy. And there were German submarines off American ports looking for ships. So those are huge things. And by the way, there's a really great movie on Apple TV, Greyhound. And what it is Tom Hanks is the star. He's a destroyer captain in the convoys in 1940. And it's made after a really great novel by C.S. Forester called The Good Shepherd. That novel, really worth reading. Very fun, very exciting. And you get a sense of the intensity of all that. And, the convoys across the Atlantic were very heavy casualty count. Because, when the ship was sunk, most of the crew died, and lots of ships were sunk. And we were escorting them, see. So Roosevelt set all that up. And then when Pearl Harbor was attacked, and see, that's, the close relations, war relations with Britain and America emerged or developed in the summer and fall of 1940, when Britain was alone. Well, Japan attacks the United States in December of 1941, and now we're in it. And then Churchill went to visit. And I made this point before, I'll make it again. Churchill was a rare human being who carried in his memory and experience how to fight a world war. What would it take? How big is it going to be? How much weapons do you need? He was Minister of Munitions in the First World War in Britain. And so he goes over there and they show him their vast plans to build weapons. And Churchill says, that's really good. He says, triple it.
Triple it.
You can build a lot more. and they did, And so, Roosevelt had a great 2 years there.
So when we come back, we're going to talk about how Winston Churchill won over Hopkins, but more importantly, in 1914, how he won over his colleagues to get the fleet ready. Because right now, America, we are on the cusp, and nobody believes it. I understand that. Everything is roses and hazy blue skies with hazy clouds. It's not. We're on the edge of the abyss. People don't believe it, but Dr. Arnn and I are going to talk about it when we come back. Don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. We are in the middle of the world crisis. Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, and all of the Hillsdale Dialogues, including, I think we've done, this is chapter 9, so we've done 9 hours on the world crisis. Dr. Arnn, there's a lesson within this lesson on how to win an argument, which is before you enter into the argument, determine the most important things that you want to establish and tenaciously hold to them. He writes that Edwin Gray would make a point and mark the wisdom of a man. They were his fortified villages, his 2 points. All around in the open field, the battle ebbed and flowed, but at nightfall, if these 2 points were still in possession, his battle was won. He, Winston Churchill, then made the point about the 2 points he had, which is that the Navy had to stay ahead of the diplomats and that Germany would attack through Belgium. And that's all he would say again and again is, we need a bigger Navy, we got to be ready, and the Germans will attack through Belgium. And he was right, and Edwin Gray was right. But do we have a lesson to take away for presidential candidates of all sorts about how to win a presidential campaign, which is to stake out 2 points and say them again and again and again, and then stand by them?
We have the, yes, of course, right. We have the amazing example of the 2016 Trump campaign, which, first of all, he's very skillful, and it boiled down to a simple phrase. He would walk out in front of those rallies, and he'd say, first words, he'd say, gonna build a wall, and the crowd would go crazy. Now, he never got that wall built, or part of it got built. They're taking down some parts that he built. But that stood for a whole approach. And people could see that, I think. And I think that's why he won and why he got more votes the second time than any Republican has ever got. And so, in other words, yeah, you do have to simplify, but it's not just for political purposes too. You have to organize your own behavior. I don't like rules, and I try not to make them. I always go through an exercise to repeal them in the summer when you got a minute. And so we always try to remember in our reasoning about how to run the college, it's very complicated, because there's always stuff to decide. And it's always moving, too. It's never the same. Right now, we're about to build a building. We also need to build on to our library.
What new building are you building?
We're building in March. We're going to break ground on a master's of classical education building. And see, we've made a terrible mess for ourselves. This is just like war. We made a mess for ourselves because we built the most beautiful chapel that anybody has built in 100 years. And the stuff near it is pretty and not up to snuff.
Duncan Stroik is pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, it is, And, I've fallen into the clutches of a bunch of classical architects, including Duncan Stroik. And, they make really pretty things. And so we're going to build this Master of Classical Education. And it's designed, and it's going to start soon. And it's ready to go, and it's worthy to be near the chapel. Now we got to do something to the library. And the library was built in the 1960s and 70s and looks a bit like that. And we've covered it up some with a colonnade, but now it's going to get bigger. Shouldn't it be beautiful? And then Central Hall.
Oh, you're into if you give the moose a muffin territory. You have a granddaughter. Have you read her that yet?
Yeah, no, I haven't, but it's good. I will read it to her. Yeah, so so the point is, and now it dawned on me 4 months ago, that every time we put something in that quad, the North Quad, we call it, it takes 2 years and tears up the quad. Should we try to do all these things at once? Well, I have a principle, and that is you don't borrow money to build buildings. And we built a bunch of buildings here, and the campus is a lot prettier than it used to be, and much better, works better. Needs some more improvements. Should we build these all at once? Because we got the money for one. And so we're figuring that out right now. And we have to figure it out by March 1st.
Oh, my.
And that means a whole bunch of things have to happen in tandem. We have to make the plans. We have to see, can we build them all in series? Because it looks like if we do everything we want to do back there, we'll have the most beautiful quad built in 100 years, like the chapel. It's very lovely. And if we do it together, we can do it in 3 years.
There are three great campuses that I've seen, Dr. Arnn. I think that Princeton is a beautiful place. I think the University of Virginia is a beautiful place. And I think that Miami University of Ohio. Now, these are all universities built before 1825. And so they're all built either Georgian or classical style. Can you get to that level in the North Quad?
Oh, yeah. We're the man. You won't. It's, one of these days, since some people watch this, I'll show the drawings on TV. A whole bunch of stuff has got to move together. All the parts of the college. I always say to the architects, because these are the best architects. Duncan is one of them. James McCurry is one of them. Michael Imber is one of them, the ones we use. And there's 60 or 80 in the world, probably. I get that number from who recruits at Notre Dame hard, where my younger daughter was a graduate of the School of Architecture. Good, very good. It's the best classical architecture school. And so I know who goes and recruits there. Well, I've gotten to know 3 of them pretty well and worked with them. And we've decided that you don't have enough time to get to know all of those guys. And so we're not looking for new architects anymore. We're going to use these 3 probably. And we got them working together now, which is delightful. They each like to have all the business, but they They don't get to do that.
Well, they'd actually each like to have the whole vision, too, right? They would like to do it their way. But if you make three great minds work together, you get a better symphony than if you have one instrument.
That's what I think. And sure enough, these plans that we've been making keep getting better as they deliberate with each other and with us. And so I like that. And also in the last stage, which was revealed to me yesterday in what we call a charrette, means when you get together.
I know what that is. That is a cart into which plans are put. In the French, about the 1600s, they would take a cart around with these plans in it. And from that came a planning term called a charrette. And I got paid $25 to use that term 3 times in a meeting with the California Department of Fish and Game. And not one person in the room knew what it meant, and no one interrupted me, Dr. Arnn. And I won $25.
Yeah. Yeah, so I learned from these architects what it means, and not that long ago. And so yesterday was a delightful day because the plan got prettier and cheaper.
What?
Wow. And they're very talented people, and if you tell them what you need, they work, and they did good yesterday, really good.
How does a plan to rebuild anything get cheaper?
Yeah, I don't know. They cut some stuff out. We decided that the original plan was, the original plan is gorgeous, and also it's uniform in this North Quad. And the more we thought about it, and I've shown it to dozens of people now because I carried those plans with me on my iPad. And people love them, but the more I talk about them and the more we all do and study them and think about them, we thought it's just too uniform back there. It will look, if we built that one, it would look like an Oxford College. Oxford College, the quads in Oxford colleges are smaller. They're little quads, right? This is quite a big quad. And so do you want this monolithic looking thing? And so sure enough, if you build it all, because see, they talk about, these architects talk about massing, and that means how big is it, how tall is it, all that. And massing costs money. What if you don't do quite so much of it? What if you have some variety? What if you have a gap or two?
This was an unanticipated turn, but I'm going to bring it back to the book and to the planning at Hillsdale because it actually connects. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Larry Arnn, except Hugh for Hillsdale.com. Hugh for F-O-R, Hillsdale.com for all of the Hillsdale Dialogues, all of them. And I think you ought to start listening to them. It's the best podcast in America, and it has been for 15 years.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I told you I would bring this all together. I didn't know we would talk about architectural planning at Hillsdale today. But when Churchill converted the Navy in Great Britain, he told Jackie Fisher, you can't have everything you want. Even as he told the cabinet, we need everything they need. Are you doing the same thing between your board and your architects, Dr. Arnn? Because you've got to hold voracious demands on both sides, right?
That's right. And it's we have a unitary executive at Hillsdale College, and that means we can make decisions. But we have a board that governs, right? So, the chairman of the Building and Grounds Committee and the chairman of the board and the whole board, they're involved in all this, right? And so we're thinking hard, and we can think hard together, and we can reach decisions. But the reason it sprung to mind is all these things that Churchill is doing in this chapter that we're talking about in these 6 days. That's 3 intense years of work that he did with many other people that came together to produce a fleet that was ready to go on the day in question. But when the decisions were made years earlier, nobody could predict exactly what was going to happen. So there was a lot of guessing. And, you remember at one point they decided to build these 15-inch guns.
Yes.
And they didn't know if they could work. Will it, it's bigger. It's throwing a bigger shell. Will it function? Changes the design of the ship. And they saw the advantages in a battle later down the road against the German Navy that's emerging if they have those bigger guns. But will they work? And it takes 2 years. Today it takes terrible. We're not up to their standard anymore. 2 years to build one. And they don't really know for sure until they build one how well they will perform. So
can I pause there? Because I want to make sure we put this point in. Churchill has an enormous courage when it comes to making hard choices. They're not always going to be right, but he's right 8 out of 10 times. But he has the courage to decide things and to defend his decisions. I think that quality is missing in public life, Dr. Arnn. Do you agree with me about that? The courage to make a tough choice and defend it.
And there's a lot that goes into that. What led me off into this is I say to the architects, if you guys were painters, that's a very hard thing to do, right? And there are a few great painters in history. But you'd be working in a room with a canvas and some brushes and paint. But this is not like that. You start with that, but then what emerges is an effort of a whole institution over years to produce the thing. And we always have to keep our eye on that. That's what it takes. That's what it is to build a Navy, you see. And that means that you do have to have the courage to make decisions, but also you have to be able to get a lot of people to work together to figure out what the best decision is. In the end, it'll only be a guess. But, we have this example of Churchill who included Jackie Fisher, who was in some important ways a bad man and betrayed Churchill and Britain later. But he was also a creative genius. And Churchill wanted that spark in there. He wanted somebody in there who would raise a lot of questions and get things done, you see. And so to preserve good governance so that you can, first of all, it's an achievement just to study things carefully and hold open questions for as long as you can. When I first came to I've studied Churchill all my life, and I've also run things all my life. I never set out for the second, but I ended up doing it. And I remember when I came, I had a person or two say to me, "We have to make a decision." And I would say, "Well, not yet."
Not yet.
And then I would get somebody say, "Don't we have to have the courage to make decisions?" And I would say, "Not yet." And there was a very pregnant meeting one time, and people were saying that I was a ditherer. I think my predecessor might have made decisions faster than I make them. I don't know. But their reaction suggested that. And, of course, people want to make a decision right away because that gives clarity and you don't have to hold things in suspense and it's easier to work, right? On the other hand, I said one time in a very important meeting, I said, hard decisions are always like this. You don't know what to do. And facts become clear over time. Shouldn't you make the really hard decisions as late as you can?
Amen. We are as late in the hour as we can go. I'm going to leave it there because when you rush a hard decision, you are going to make a mistake. But you need to know they're looming. You need to know they're out there. We come back next week with the first actions in the First World War with Dr. Larry Arnn.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.